But before we get into the enterprise AI tech companies, let's start with probably the biggest AI announcement of last week, which was that Facebook, Meta, came out with a huge AI launch last week, which included their Llama 3 model, as well as putting assistance on everything from threads to Facebook to what have you. And it just, they really went all in on AI. It's not the first time Meta's gone all in on a new and emerging technology. But how does this time around feel to you?
You mean like maybe like the metaverse, which they don't even talk about hardly at all anymore? Yeah.
Hmm.
The look, I'm impressed on a couple levels, and I'm obviously going to look at this from an enterprise perspective. But let's start with sort of just the building blocks of it. First and foremost, I've played with it a little bit over the weekend. It looks solid. It looks relatively impressive. I think it holds its own from a raw model. We talked over the last few weeks about the fact that we're seeing this sort of almost commoditization of the foundational models, and this sort of perpetuates that. It's certainly not a joke. It's the real deal. I think what is truly impactful, again, not enterprise at all, but it was truly impactful to the world, is that they have the biggest platform, or one of the biggest platforms in the
Hmm.
world. I would argue even more so than like Google or being in with Microsoft, because so much of the world spends time every single day on one of these meta platforms, meta products. And so it's going to open up the world to people like my mother, and ironically, because she's 20 some odd years younger than me, my wife, who
Hmm.
doesn't play with any of this tech, but she uses Facebook. And so it's like, I was just telling you the other day, it's like, I've been able to convince her to try any of these things, but it's like, here, it's on Facebook now. Just hit the little round glowing circle and knock yourself out. So I think it's going to have the process or the ability to normalize everything. More broadly, though, from an enterprise perspective, I actually think this may be the dark horse to watch, because of all of that, because they have access to, whether we like it or not, this access to all the data in all these platforms to train the model, where they don't have some of the issues that, say, OpenAI does about having to scrape the web, right, for their training.
Hmm.
um, they're going to have this really interesting sort of position in the market that may, in fact, be very interesting for the enterprise. They have made a few overtures over the years towards the enterprise. They had, what was it called, Facebook Workplace, I think. They've tried a few times,
Yes.
and they've mostly been half-assed as far as the effort. But this one, the Llama is already available in all the major cloud providers in their workplaces. And this idea of portability, which is, we talked a lot about open source sort of AI, and there's still a lot of issues about what that even means. But I think there's a lot of enterprise execs who could look at this and go, I don't love the idea of being locked in with a cloud provider, and this ability to have a model that I can sort of have some portability with. It may be a red herring. It may not be true. There's all these fun, factors around it, but there may be an enterprise play here that we aren't fully expecting. So I'm fairly bullish on it, at least as an opening salvo, and I think good for them.
Yeah. What I find interesting about this approach so far is that they Meta obviously has control of their data, for better or for worse. We have all signed up into Meta's data
Well,
permissions, and they're able to get language in a variety of different models, whether it be what they're doing from the WhatsApp side or what they're doing with Facebook entries. Those are different types of writing that they're able to access relatively easily. And they're going to be able to update that over time, because I don't foresee Facebook disappearing over the next year or two, um, or WhatsApp or Instagram for that matter. They all have established themselves as gigantic services. And Llama 3 has also created kind of these different levels of model. There's, I believe, a 8 billion parameter and then a 70 billion parameter model. And the 8 billion parameter is kind of similar to the Databricks model that we saw, that we talked about recently, where it's going to be relatively performance friendly in terms of not having to use a ton of resources. Obviously, it's 10 times smaller than the other models. So that's, you know, 1/10 the processing by definition. And then the 70 billion model is going to be useful for larger general use cases where you need to really understand what is happening with language at a very detailed level. But at the same time, that may not be the best model for all use cases. That is going to compete more against, say, the Grok model, which is 300 whatever 60 billion parameters or whatever, or the large open AI models that are in the tens of billions of parameters. So they are setting themselves up both for that performance model that is good for actual, say, day-to-day operations, as well as your specialist supermodel. And I think that honestly, when we look at AI from the enterprise perspective, we're going to be looking a lot at these, call it 5 billion, 6 billion, 7 billion parameter models, just because from a practical perspective, if you're running something in production, there are cost concerns, there's FinOps concerns, there are, we can only get so many GPUs or TPUs or computing unit of choice for AI at the IT level. So we're going to have to figure out how to make this work from a practical perspective. And Meta is putting itself as a player to potentially be able to help out across the board with these things.
Yeah, well, and they're reportedly working on a 400 billion parameter model. What is not entirely clear to me is, and this has always been their gap, right? Is what that execution play looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And while I look at this and say, hey, this is a great starting point, we have zero clarity on any of that. In terms of, are they even, what they even intend on doing with this, right? I mean, for good or for bad, Meta, Facebook / Meta has always had so much money that they were going to, it's sort of like respond first and figure it out later. And to a degree, I feel like it's more of the same. But this is right now we're in a war of the foundation models, and they're at least in the race. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. So one of the other things I saw during last week was that Facebook has also put AI assistance on things like posting on Facebook, and sometimes the results are not what you would expect. For instance, there was a post about in a New York City school group about somebody asking about getting assistance for their child who is, I believe, both autistic and gifted or something along those lines. And Meta AI literally came back with a response saying, I have a child who is autistic and gifted. And let me tell you about how my child is going through the school system. The AI responses may need to be tweaked a little bit. Obviously, it was creating a response that was similar to other similar requests that had happened in the group. And that is a challenge that generative AI has in general, that it wants to echo the corpus of the data that it is trained on.
And you talked about the fact that it had its own data and that it was all this different type of data, and it is by definition this very conversational, friend oriented data. So you're going to see those sorts of things. I also think something that in the long run I think is going to be good for Meta and their models is that most of the use cases right now for all of these foundational models are people that are fairly tuned in. They're early adopters. They're people like you and me. They're knowledge workers. And now suddenly Meta's going to have their models exposed to people that have no flipping idea. I mean, I remember when the first PCs came out, I was a kid. We called him an uncle, but he was a family friend. And it's like, he couldn't conceptualize what this was. He wanted to ask it questions, which ironically now you could probably ask ChatGPT or whatever, but you want to ask it like questions about the future. And I think you're going to have this very similar experience with people with these models, because these are the folks that are not at all tuned into what they are and what prompt engineering is and how to interact with it. And I think you're going to get a whole lot of these sort of unexpected results. And I also think the industry is going to make much more hay with it than is warranted. It's the nature of the beast with this stuff. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think it's going to be some good fun for a while anyway.
Yes, but goofy stories aside, I'm absolutely sure that Meta is going to create LLMs that are competitive with the market at large from a pure technology perspective. The question for Meta is always, how are you going to commercialize this? And although they're better than Google at this, they do also have the challenge that if a product doesn't impact 100 million people, they're not quite sure what to do with it. Which is a real problem because most products never get to that stage, but can still be valuable.
Well, the good news is that this one is unquestionably going to impact everybody. It's going to
Mhm.
be, and we're going to talk about some of these other announcements. I think it is also a leading edge of something that we're going to see become more and more problematic, and that is this idea that everything is going to have AI baked into it. And the question then becomes for us as users, for if you're an enterprise, for your users, when do you use which? Does it matter? How do you play that out? If you've got co-pilots in every single tool you're using, if you've got this sitting in Facebook, and are they giving you different answers? Does it, how does that part, we've historically, we've gone through this with a few different technologies. Low code, no code tools are another one of those, right? It used to be an entire category, and now it's simply a way that almost all tools are being orchestrated and
Right.
the way you customize. And I think you see this with a bunch of different things. And AI is going to be like that. And it's going to be a problem for anyone trying to differentiate in the enterprise. And it's going to create a real conflict. So conversational AI before all of the Gen AI stuff, right? In the conversational AI space that existed in a pre-Gen AI world, this was already becoming an issue because someone would deploy a conversational AI bot that was customer facing, and then there'd be another conversational AI for internal facing, and maybe the one be specifically for the service desk. And even as employees or customers, you start to get confused. Which one am I supposed to use? How do I? And so I think we're going to see a lot of the same thing, and there's going to be some opportunities for some normalization. I mean, we've said this before. We're very, very early days, but I think on the the surface, you can't roll out Facebook or have Facebook or Threads or Instagram and not have an agent, right? Snapchat has theirs. Every tool is going to have something. And then the question is it just a got to have it feature and it's just there? Or is it an actual in the market play? And that's going to be the big question for Meta with what they actually end up doing with this.